On April 26, 1986, at 1:23 in the morning, reactor number 4 at the Vladimir Lenin nuclear power station exploded. The blast tore through the building's roof and sent a plume of radioactive material 2 kilometers into the sky above northern Ukraine. Within hours, Soviet officials assembled a team of photographers and journalists to document what had happened. Among them was Igor Kostin, a photojournalist for the Novosti press agency who'd covered everything from Olympic Games to state visits. He arrived at the plant on the afternoon of April 26th, camera in hand, with no protective equipment beyond what the soldiers offered him. The officials needed proof of the disaster's scope, and Kostin was there to provide it. What he captured that day would become some of the most significant documentary evidence of nuclear catastrophe in human history. But the camera itself absorbed so much radiation that when Kostin developed the film, most of the images emerged as ruined black squares. Only one photograph survived, grainy, damaged, but unmistakable. That single image showed the destroyed reactor core, still burning, with debris scattered across the facility grounds. It was the first visual confirmation to reach the outside world of what had actually happened at Chernobyl, and it came at a cost. Igor Kostin absorbed a massive dose of radiation during that brief visit to the plant, reportedly around 250 roentgens, which equals approximately 5 times the acceptable lifetime exposure limit. The exposure caused immediate nausea and a pounding headache that wouldn't fade for weeks. But Kostin returned to Chernobyl repeatedly over the following months and years. Driven by what he described as a duty to document the truth, each visit added to his cumulative dose. The photographs taken in the immediate aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster reveal a catastrophe that defied comprehension. Soviet authorities initially withheld most of these images from public view. Concerned about panic and international scrutiny, many wouldn't surface until the 1990s, after the Soviet Union's collapse. What they show goes beyond the mechanical failure of a nuclear reactor. They document the intersection of human error, institutional secrecy, and the invisible violence of radiation, a force that cannot be seen, heard, or felt until it's already rewriting your cellular structure. In the hours following the explosion, firefighters from Pripyat arrived at the plant without any understanding of what they were confronting. They'd been trained to fight chemical fires and building blazes, not to handle exposed nuclear fuel. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik led his crew onto the reactor building's roof, where chunks of graphite moderator lay scattered and glowing. The graphite blocks, each weighing several kilograms, were essentially pieces of the reactor core itself. Pravik and his men kicked them aside with their boots or picked them up with their hands to clear paths for their hoses. Photographs taken the next morning show these men in the hospital at Pripyat, their skin already darkening with radiation burns. Their hands had swollen to twice normal size. Within hours, they were evacuated to Moscow's Hospital No. 6, the Soviet Union's specialized radiation treatment facility. Pravik died on May 11, 1986. 27 other firefighters and plant workers would follow him within the next 4 months. The medical photographs from Hospital No. 6 remain classified, but journalists who gained access to the facility in 1986 described what they witnessed. Patients lay in isolated rooms with their skin peeling away in sheets. Their bone marrow had ceased producing blood cells. Their digestive systems were shutting down doctors' attempted experimental treatments, including bone marrow transplants from family members, but the radiation doses these men had absorbed, between 600 and 1,600 rads, left little hope. One physician, Dr. Angelina Guskova, kept detailed records of the progression of acute radiation syndrome in each patient. Her notes documented how the body essentially disintegrates from the inside out, as cells lose the ability to regenerate. The firefighters from that first night represented the highest exposure cases, but they were far from the only victims. In Pripyat, the city of approximately 49,000 that housed the plant workers and their families, residents went about their normal routines on the morning of April 26th. Children attended school. People went to work. The explosion had been visible from apartment windows, and many residents gathered on the railway bridge that offered a clear view of the plant, watching the strange glow above Reactor 4. They had no idea they were standing in a cloud of radioactive particles. The bridge would later be nicknamed the Bridge of Death, though exact casualty figures from that location remain disputed. Soviet officials didn't order an evacuation until 36 hours after the explosion. On the afternoon of April 27th, a fleet of 1,200 buses arrived from Kiev. Residents were told to pack light. They'd be gone for 3 days, maybe a week. They left behind apartments fully furnished, with dishes still in cupboards and photographs on walls. The photographs of abandoned Pripyat, taken in the weeks and months after evacuation, show a city frozen in time. A photographer named Anatoly Rosinsky documented the scene in June 1986. Classrooms still had textbooks open on desks. The amusement park, which had been scheduled to open on May 1st for the May Day celebrations, stood empty with its bright yellow Ferris wheel motionless against the sky. In apartment buildings, windows gaped open where residents had tried to air out rooms before leaving. Personal belongings littered stairwells where people had dropped them in their hurry to reach the buses. The Soviet government declared a 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant and began what they termed liquidation operations, the cleanup of contaminated areas. The liquidation efforts involved approximately 600,000 workers over the next 4 years. These men, called liquidators, came from across the Soviet Union. Many of them military conscripts or reservists called up for compulsory service. Their tasks varied based on location and contamination levels. Some operated bulldozers that pushed contaminated topsoil into burial pits. Others entered buildings to retrieve equipment or documents deemed valuable. The most dangerous assignments went to the biorobots, men who worked on the reactor building's roof to clear radioactive debris that the actual robots couldn't handle. The robots, designed for industrial work, had their electronics fried within minutes by the intense radiation field. So the biorobots took over, working in shifts lasting between 40 and 90 seconds, just long enough to shovel debris into the reactor core before reaching their maximum safe exposure. In total, 3,828 biorobots worked on clearing the roof, each one of them a volunteer who knew the danger. Photographs show these men in improvised protective gear, heavy rubber aprons, lead sheets wrapped around their torsos, respirators that did little against gamma radiation. Each shift earned them triple wages and a certificate of gratitude from the state. In the forests surrounding Chernobyl, the contamination created what scientists termed the red forest. Pine trees, highly sensitive to radiation, absorbed cesium-137 and strontium-90 through their root systems. Within weeks, the trees turned bright ginger red and died. The red forest covered approximately 10 square kilometers, directly downwind of the plant. Photographs from summer 1986 show an eerie landscape of rust-colored trees against green grass, with soldiers in protective suits marking areas for cleanup. The liquidators eventually bulldozed the entire forest and buried it in trenches lined with concrete. They planted new trees, but the soil remained contaminated. Even today, radiation levels in that zone exceed 100 millisieverts per year, more than 30 times the maximum recommended annual dose. The animal populations around Chernobyl absorbed radiation through the food chain. Photographs taken by scientists in 1986 and 1987 documented the effects cattle that grazed on contaminated grass developed thyroid abnormalities and tumors. Barn swallows showed increased rates of albinism and beak deformities. In the lakes and rivers, fish died in massive numbers as radiation poisoned the water. One particularly disturbing set of photographs showed piglets born in the months after the disaster with severe skeletal deformities, extra limbs, fused bones, missing eyes. The Soviet Agricultural Ministry ordered the slaughter of livestock within the 30-kilometer zone, but scattered farm animals remained, abandoned by evacuated residents. These creatures became unwitting subjects for long-term radiation studies, as scientists tracked mutation rates across generations. Igor Kostin continued photographing Chernobyl throughout 1986 and beyond. In one series from May 1986, he captured the massive concrete structure taking shape over Reactor 4. What would become known as the sarcophagus workers assembled this containment structure in conditions of extreme radiation, racing to seal the reactor before winter. The photographs show the construction from various angles, cranes lifting steel beams, workers in protective gear, and always, in the background, the ruined reactor building with its jagged edges and missing roof. Kostin's camera documented the human faces of the liquidators, young men mostly, some barely out of their teens, their expressions ranging from determination to exhaustion to something closer to resignation. In Hospital Number 6 in Moscow, photographers documented the treatment wards with permission from the Ministry of Health. These images, intended for medical journals, showed the progression of acute radiation syndrome with clinical precision. Patients in the early stages appeared sunburned. Within days, their hair fell out. Their gums bled. Internal hemorrhaging began. The photographs tracked this deterioration day by day, creating a visual record of what happens to the human body under extreme radiation exposure. Dr. Guskova's team tried everything available: blood transfusions, antibiotics to fight infections, experimental drugs that had shown promise in animal studies. For the most severely exposed, nothing worked. Their bodies had absorbed so much radiation that cellular repair became impossible. The villages within the exclusion zone faced liquidation by bulldozer. Soviet authorities determined that 187 villages were too contaminated to remain. Rather than attempt decontamination, they opted for complete destruction. Photographs from 1987 and 1988 show bulldozers crushing wooden houses, pushing the debris into pits, and covering everything with soil. Entire communities disappeared: churches, schools, cemeteries, homes that families had occupied for generations. The photographers who documented this process captured the scale of displacement. Empty village squares, Orthodox crosses marking mass graves of buried houses, roads leading to nothing. The government relocated approximately 116,000 people permanently, adding them to the 49,000 evacuated from Pripyat. These displaced populations received compensation, 2,000 rubles per family, enough for about 4 months of average wages, and assignment to new housing in other regions. The photographs that emerged from Chernobyl in 1986 served multiple purposes. For Soviet officials, they provided documentation for internal reports to the Politburo about the scale of the disaster and the cleanup efforts. For international observers, the few images that leaked out through Western journalists offered the first real evidence of what had happened, countering the minimal information Moscow initially released. For scientists, the photographs became crucial data points for understanding radiation effects on environments and living organisms. And for people like Igor Kostin, they represented a form of witness, a refusal to let the disaster disappear into official silence. Kostin himself paid the price for that witness. He continued photographing Chernobyl for years, accumulating radiation exposure with each visit. In later interviews, he described chronic health problems, fatigue, weakened immunity, persistent nausea, but he also expressed no regrets about his work. In his 2006 book, Chernobyl: Confessions of a Reporter, he wrote that someone had to document what happened, that the world needed to see the truth about nuclear disasters. His photographs remain in archives in Moscow and Kiev, a visual record of catastrophe that continues to inform our understanding of Chernobyl's legacy. The medical consequences of Chernobyl extended far beyond the immediate victims. In Belarus, which received roughly 60% of the fallout due to wind patterns, doctors began tracking thyroid cancer rates in children. Radioactive iodine-131, absorbed through contaminated milk, concentrated in children's thyroid glands. By the early 1990s, pediatric thyroid cancer rates had increased by a factor of 30 in the most affected regions. Photographs from hospitals in Minsk and Gomel showed wards full of children with surgical scars across their necks, the result of thyroid removal operations. The World Health Organization eventually confirmed over 5,000 cases of thyroid cancer among people who were children in 1986, with the numbers continuing to rise through the 2000s. The liquidators faced their own long-term health crisis. Many developed various forms of cancer, leukemia, lung cancer, thyroid cancer, at rates significantly higher than the general population. Soviet and later Russian authorities disputed these connections, attributing the cancers to other factors like smoking or alcohol consumption. The liquidators formed advocacy groups, fighting for recognition and medical benefits. Photographs from their gatherings in the 1990s and 2000s show men wearing their medals and certificates from the cleanup operations, aged beyond their years, demanding acknowledgement of their sacrifice. The exclusion zone itself became a subject of ongoing photographic documentation. As years passed and nature reclaimed the abandoned areas, photographers like Kostin and others returned to capture the transformation. Pripyat's buildings slowly deteriorated, roofs collapsing, walls covered in vegetation, streets cracked and broken. The amusement park's Ferris wheel rusted in place, becoming an iconic symbol of the disaster. Wildlife returned to the zone in unexpected numbers. With humans gone, populations of wolves, wild boar, and deer increased dramatically. Despite the radiation, scientists studied these animals, finding radiation markers in their tissues but also documenting their apparent resilience. The photographs of animals thriving in the exclusion zone created an unsettling paradox. A place too dangerous for humans had become a de facto nature preserve. Igor Kostin died in Kiev in 2015 at age 78, from injuries sustained in a car accident. His death was not directly attributed to radiation exposure, though his health had declined in his later years. His archive of Chernobyl photographs remains one of the most comprehensive visual records of the disaster and its aftermath. Other photographers who worked at Chernobyl have since contributed their images to historical collections, but Kostin's work stands out for its scope and persistence. He returned to the zone repeatedly, creating a longitudinal study in images that spans decades. The photographs taken inside Chernobyl after the disaster serve as evidence of a catastrophe that killed at least 31 people in the immediate aftermath and exposed millions to varying levels of radiation. The official Soviet death toll of 31 includes only the firefighters and plant workers who died from acute radiation syndrome in the first 4 months. Estimates of long-term deaths from cancer and other radiation-induced illnesses vary widely, from 4,000 projected deaths according to UN agencies to much higher figures claimed by independent researchers. The photographs cannot resolve these disputes about total casualties, but they document the physical reality of what happened: the destroyed reactor, the abandoned cities, the sickness, the cleanup efforts, the transformed landscape. These images disturb because they make visible something that should remain invisible. Radiation itself cannot be photographed. It leaves no visual trace in the moment of exposure, but its effects, the burned skin, the dying forests, the empty streets, the demolished villages, all of that can be captured on film. The photographers who documented Chernobyl created a visual grammar for nuclear disaster, showing what happens when containment fails and invisible particles scatter across hundreds of kilometers. Their work continues to shape how we understand not just Chernobyl, but the broader risks of nuclear technology. What other historical disasters do you think deserve this level of photographic documentation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more in-depth looks at pivotal moments in history, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.